Okay, so now we're going to get into the HTTP module, which is a module that allows us to basically create a server and listen for HTTP requests. Now, you can create a complete web server with this module. However, it's not really recommended. The HTTP module is very low level and doesn't provide many features that are needed in a production environment. So, for example, it doesn't handle routing or sessions or static files. To create a production-ready web server, you would use a framework like Express. And we'll be going over Express in depth in the next section. We're going to create a full REST API with it. Now, you can create a full REST API with just the HTTP module, but it's going to be much harder. It's going to be much more code. It's going to be more error-prone. You can do this much easier with Express. Express is actually built on top of the HTTP module. Now, with that said, I do want to show you how to just kind of use this and just the basics of it. So we're going to create a very simple server. So let's say const HTTP, set that to require HTTP. All right, and then we're going to create a variable called server, and there's a method called create server that we're going to use. So HTTP create server, and this is going to take in a callback function, and that's going to have a request and a response. Okay, now what I want to do is call response, and both of these objects have tons of methods on them, methods and properties. With on response, there's an end method, and that will basically just end. It will send the response, and then if I want to send something with it, I can put it in here. So I'll just say hello world. Okay, now we need our server to listen on a port, so we can say server and then dot listen and then a port number. I typically like to use 5,000 for my back-end stuff. For my front-end, like dev server and all that, I'll usually use 3,000. But for back-end, I usually use 5,000. So this is going to take in a function, and we're just going to do a console log and just let the user know that the server is running. So we'll say server is listening on port 5,000. And that should do it. We should be able to run the server now. If we come down here and we run the file, which is called HTTP, you can see server is listening on port 5000, which means that I can make a request to it. And there's many different ways I can do that. I can do it from the browser. You can see I actually have 3000 and 5000 as shortcuts. If I go to 5000, I get hello world because that's what's being responded. That's what my server is responding with. I could use curl, which is a command line tool, and if you do curl -- version, you can see if it's on your system. And then I'll just do curl HTTP, not S, just HTTP localhost port 5000, and I get hello world. Now, the tool that I would recommend you use when you're dealing with back-end stuff, especially in the next section when we create our API, is Postman. And you can get it from postman.com. It's free. It's very, very powerful. So I'm going to just open that up. Because from the browser, yes, you can make GET requests, but you can't make post, you can't make put, delete, etc. So from here, you can see I can choose whatever type of request I want. Now this is just a GET request, so let's say HTTP localhost port 5000. If I send, I get hello world. So no matter what software I use or what client I use to hit that server, I'm going to get back hello world, and I get a 200 response, which means everything is good. If we look in the headers, we just have a couple things, the content length, the date, and so on. So it's a very simple server. All it does is return hello world, but it is a server. It does accept HTTP requests. Now, remember what I said, just using this module, you don't have things like routing, which is essential when you're creating back-end APIs. You can set up routes, but it's just very difficult and very low level. So I'll show you how we can do that. So I'm going to just get rid of this response end, and let's first of all get the request URL. So I'm going to create a variable called URL, and that request object has a URL property on it. In fact, let's just console log request.url, and we'll just do a respond. So we'll say response.end and just say, I don't know, hello, just to respond with something. Now we do have to restart the server, and when we make any changes, that's another kind of pain in the neck. But if I go to Postman now and I send, and then we look down in the console, you'll see slash, right? If I go to localhost 5000 / about and hit send, and I look in the console, you see slash about. So that's coming from this request.url. So what I could do is I could have an if statement or a switch, some kind of conditional here to see what the URL is. So I'll say if the URL is equal to slash, then let's say response.end, and let's say I want to return HTML. Usually you're going to use this stuff to create APIs that return JSON data, and then from your front end you fetch that JSON data and use it in your interface. But you can also use Node.js to directly serve HTML templates. So let's say we want HTML in here, like an H1, and just say welcome. Now, in order for this to parse, we have to add in the HTML headers, what's called the headers, we have to add a content type value of text/HTML. So the way that we create headers with the HTTP module is with response.writeHead, okay, because we're writing to the headers. And the first argument is going to be the status code, which is going to be 200. Everything is okay. And then we can pass in some options. And one of those options is content-type. And I'm going to set that to text/HTML. Okay, each content type has one of these. For instance, CSS is text/CSS. JSON is application/JSON. So you might want to get to know some of these for popular data types, or I should say file types. All right, so let's try that. I'm going to just get rid of this response, and we're going to just restart the server. And if I go back to Postman and I go to /about, it just hangs because I have no response for that. I actually probably should have just kept the hello. But this isn't firing off because we're going to /about, and this is only if the URL is /. So if I go to just the index, and I can go to the body here, now I can see my welcome. And that should parse because you can see the content type is text HTML. So if I go to that in the browser, welcome is now parsing as an H1. On the back end here, if I didn't do that, right, then it's just going to be regular content. So if I reload the page now and I go to my browser and I reload, okay, so it still is parsing. So it's parsing anyways, but sometimes it can be text content. Wait, no, not text content. What is it? Plain text, I think. I think it's plain or plain text. I can't remember, but we'll try that out. And since I have that as the content type, now it actually shows the H1, so it doesn't parse the HTML. All right, now if I wanted an about page, I could say else if, let's say else if the URL is equal to /. And by the way, you wouldn't create a website like this. I'm just showing you how this works. I wouldn't recommend creating a whole website in this way. So for this, let's say about for the title, and then we can just do another else. And if it's not the home page or it's not the about page, then what we can do is create a 404 response, and we'll say page not found. All right, so let's save that. Let's reload, restart the server, and let's go to the browser. If I reload, I see my welcome. If I go to /about, I see page not found. That's because I meant for this to be /about. Okay, so if I go now to about, I see about, right? But if I go to anything else, like if I go to test, then I get page not found. So this is a very, very simple web server. So don't think that you need to do this just to create a simple website. In the next project, the Random Ideas project, I'll show you how we would correctly create a full stack application. Now, if I wanted to serve a file, I could do that because I could use the file system module or the FS module. Remember, we have a method on that called read file. So if I create, let's say, an index.html here, and we'll just say my website, and let's just have an h1 welcome, and then a paragraph, welcome to my website. And let's say I wanted to serve that when we hit this endpoint, the index route. So first thing, I'd bring in the FS module. So let's say const fs require fs, and then I'm going to just cut this. So where we write to the header and we do the response end, I'm going to cut that, and then do fs.read file, which we've already looked at. And the file I want to read is index.html. We could have it in like a subdirectory called pages or something like that, but it's right in the same location. And then that's going to take a callback that can have a possible error, and then we can also get the file. So in here, let's check for the error, and I'm going to paste this in. And what I would want to return here, if it's an error, let's do a 500, which is a server error. And I'll just return HTML. Usually it would probably be JSON, but we'll stick to HTML, and we'll just say, sorry, we have a problem, or whatever. Okay, else, if there's no error, whoops. So if there's no error, then I'm going to paste this in again, and we're going to make that 200. And in the response.end, instead of just hard coding in H1, I'm going to put the file, okay, or the content, whatever you want to call this, that comes from this file. So let's save that. Let's restart the server, and then let's go to the browser, and let's go to just the index page, and we see welcome to my website. We have the title up here, so it's serving that HTML file. Now, again, I want to stress that you shouldn't do this. For one thing, if you're just creating an HTML website and it's not an API, there's no reason to even use Node.js. If you're creating an API, then you're going to want to use something like Express, which we're going to get into in the next section, because it makes things a hell of a lot easier. But I do like you guys to understand the lower level stuff. Like right now, we're not using any frameworks or libraries. We're using just core Node.js modules. So it's good to know this stuff, but don't think that this is how you have to do it. Now, as far as JSON data goes, let's see, what should we do here? Let's create just an endpoint. We'll get rid of the about, and let's say this is going to be let's do API/posts. Because this is typically what you'll do is respond with JSON data. So I'm going to, let's get rid of, actually we'll keep the first line here, but let's change the content type. I don't want to serve HTML, I want to serve JSON. So application/JSON is going to be the content type. And then we'll just do like, actually, we'll create our posts up here. So let's say const posts, and in a real application, these would come from some kind of database. let's say an object with an ID. So we have a post with an ID, a title, say post 1, and then a body. Body would be this is post 1. Okay, and then maybe we have one more. So this will be post 2, and ID 2. All right, and then what I want to do is come down to this route of API/posts, and I want to respond. So response.end. Now, since this is that's a JavaScript object that I just created, we want to return this as JSON. So we would run it through JSON.stringify, which we've looked at a bunch of times. We've used this. So in JSON stringify, I want to return the post. Now, you could just return the post directly, but usually when I'm creating an API, I like to create an object that has a success value. So basically, if it's some kind of error, success would be false. In this case, success would be true, and then I'll set the data to the post that I want to return. And then in the front end, when you make a request to this API, to this endpoint, you'd have access to, if you use the fetch API or whatever, it would be whatever you call that variable .data, and that would be your post. Now, to try this out, we could go to Postman, and let's say HTTP, we want to go to localhost 5000 /API/posts. Make sure that you refreshed your server too. And if I send, you'll see I get a 200 response. I get this object that has a success value of true. Now, the reason that I have that is because that's how I formatted my API. When I responded, I put this object of success true, and then I put posts inside of a data, right? Data posts. So if we look in Postman and we look in data, that's the array of posts. So you can format your API to respond in any way. Like I could have just did this. I could have just said stringify and then did like posts. If I do that and then I reset the server and I go to Postman and I send again, now I just simply get a post with the array. But I always like to have an object that has a success value, either true or false, a message if it's false and it's an error, then some kind of message that says what happened, and then a data object, which is the actual data. Okay, so instead of doing this, I would prefer to do this. But it's up to you. It's up to the developer. Everybody has a different preference. All right, so I think that instead of having us keep going with the bare bones HTTP module, I think we're going to move on to the next section and see how we can really build an API using the Express framework.